Hello and welcome to Zoology Live 2021. I'm Ros Wade, I'm the Learning Officer here at the Museum of Zoology, and I'll be your guide this week as we explore animals of land, sea and sky. So today we'll be visiting the beautiful wildflower meadow at the iconic King's College Chapel. And botanist Dr. Cicely will be joining us live to answer your questions, so pop them in the comments on YouTube. We'll then be diving into the secret world of cowpats with a cowpat dissection by our Curator of Insects, Dr. Ed Turner, who'll be here live to answer your questions all about dung and insects and anything like that, and to set our Cowpats About Cambridge and Beyond challenge. Now, to give you a bit of an idea of some of the other stuff that we've got coming up this week, tomorrow at 7 p.m. we'll be voyaging out to sea, exploring coral reefs with marine biologist Dr. Katie Dunkley, and finding out all about our fabulous fin whale skeleton with our collections manager Matt Lowe. And then on Friday we'll be taking to the skies with Professor Chris Jiggins and Matt Hayes as we look at the wonderful world of butterflies and other things with wings. But back to today, did you know that it is National Meadows Day on Saturday? To celebrate, we're going to look at recent wildflower meadow addition to the Cambridge landscape. The meadow in bloom behind King's College Chapel that can be seen beautifully from the backs. First, we're going to find out how it was established with a film from the college that was made last year. And we have a short update on how the meadow is looking today. Then we'll be joined by Dr. Cicely Marshall, a botanist and fellow at King's, who is ready to answer your questions, so do pop them in the comments.
Good morning, my name's Steve Cockle, I'm the head gardener, so welcome to King's on a glorious autumnal day. Here we are standing on the edge of our very famous back lawn, and of course our new departure in lawn care, which is of course our wildflower meadow. Now you're seeing the meadow here in its quiet time, but it's been about 3 years in the preparation and making of, and it was really the Gardens Committee who came up with the idea. This lawn has been a lawn right the way back from the latter half of the 18th century. This part of Cambridge, it was the thriving, bustling centre of the city. All of the rubbish and muck and debris that went on in the 13th and 14th century, all the nutrients are still down there. So when we actually sowed the wildflower seed, we really just had to barely scratch the surface in order to get it in. Back in October of last year, we cut the grass as short as we could. We then scarified it, and then we sowed directly into that scarified tilth. Once it was all drilled and done and dusted, then we had to wait, and the waiting was really quite terrifying because, you know, if you are going to make a mistake and mess up right in front of the chapel, in front of the whole of Cambridge, really isn't a good idea. But fortunately, everything worked. Eventually we want this meadow to look like a sort of a Cambridgeshire stroke East Anglian hay meadow. The seed merchants that we went to, Emmersgate Seed, based over at Terrington St Clements, came up with the seed mixes that we've actually used. And we can see now a combination of herbaceous perennial wildflowers which are going to be coming through and flowering next year, such as the oxeye daisy, such as the knapweeds, together with the annuals that we sowed last year. And of course the annuals produced that spectacular display this year of poppies, cornflowers, corn marigolds and corn cockle. It was really, really quite spectacular. And the colour combination of the poppies against the sky blue cornflowers was really something to be seen. It was a great joy. Once we got into the late summer, it was time to actually cut the meadow. We cut it with a reciprocating blade mower, and then we baled it. This little machine went up and down, turning it into delightful little round bales, which we then left in front of the chapel for a weekend because it looked just, you know, quite special. It really did look quite lovely. that the meadow is now in transition, and the trick now is to manage the sward so that we still have colour. It is literally a living, breathing thing, and it's my responsibility and my staff's responsibility, under the auspices of the Gardens Committee, to try and present it as well as we can, but also at the same point in time, bear witness to all the sustainability and biodiversity issues that we're very, very keen to promote at King's. Our academic staff here are actually working to actually see how things increase from a biodiversity point of view as the meadow progresses. One of the great things about King's College is the way it approaches the future, because if the college is going to take this incredibly iconic view and say, yes, let's put a wildflower meadow there, it basically means that that the brakes are off for wildflower meadow creation, for ecological planting, for practicing horticulture in a more sustainable and biodiverse way, across the country.
And now we're joined by botanist Dr. Cicely Marshall. Hello, Cicely.
Hi.
Hi. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your involvement with the wildflower meadow at King's College?
Hi, it's great to be here. I'm Cicely Marshall. I'm a research fellow in biology with King's College. I'm a botanist, plant ecologist, and I work on conservation and land management issues locally in the UK and in tropical Africa as well. My involvement with the Meadow project has been to coordinate a biodiversity monitoring survey since we sowed the meadow. So we've been looking at the way that the plant species richness and associated animal species richness has been changing since we changed this land use over to a wildflower meadow.
Fantastic. So one thing about the flowers that we can see on the meadow, they look quite different this year to the way they looked last year. It's really interesting to see how is it evolving, how is it sort of changing?
Yeah, well, so the first year we planted it, we sowed in the autumn time, and the only plants that are able to flower in the first summer are annual species that complete their life cycles fast. So the first year we had all annual species, so we had the poppies and the corn chamomile, corn flowers, corn cockle, and this year we've got the perennial species of plants starting to flower as well. The perennial species are species you think of perhaps as more typical of wildflower meadows, so the grasses, are establishing and actually flowering this year. The carrots are starting to flower, kidney vetch is in there, yellow rattle is in there. That's a parasite of grasses and should help to keep the wildflower richness up in future years. Yeah, so over the next few years it should change over to something more, from more of the annual kind of showy flower mix towards towards an East Anglian hay meadow is the trajectory we're hoping for.
Oh, fantastic. You mentioned a few plants in there. Do you have any particular favourites that are in the wildflower meadow there?
We have some edible plants in there. We have sorrel, which actually is the tallest plant in the meadow. I'm quite surprised by that. It's overtopping all the poppies and corn chamomile. I like the yellow rattle. That's this hemi-parasite of grasses that does this job of keeping the grasses down and the wildflower richness up. And it's really nice to see the grasses actually. I'm probably fonder of grass species than most, but it's nice to see the grasses flowering. It makes it much more convincing as a meadow, I think.
Yeah, so I mean there are loads of different types of grasses. It's not just the kind of grass that you get in your back garden, is it? There's loads of different sorts of grasses.
There's a few different grass species in there. My favourite is probably quaking grass, Brisa media. It's very beautiful and characteristic of nutrient poor, species rich grassland. There's also sweet vernal grass in there. That's flowering well this year. That's the root sort of base of the grass tastes a bit of vanilla-y, and it's the one that farmers characteristically chew. You see that stereotype of the farmer chewing on the bottom of the grass. That's sweet vernal. That's in the middle.
I always wondered why they chew on the grass, but yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, delicious vanilla flavour.
So you've been involved in monitoring some of the biodiversity that's been supported by the wildflower meadow. What sort of results have you been getting? Has there been anything particularly surprising at all?
Well, yeah, I've been, so we've tripled the plant species richness, which is, we sowed it, so in that sense it's not surprising. But we've had species establishing that we didn't sow, that we weren't expecting, including a really rare species of eyebright, a euphrasia. It's actually a new record for the county, which is really unexpected. It probably did come in the seed mix, but there remains the possibility that it was in the seed bank. And then, the invertebrates, we have triple the number of insect species, insects and spiders, than we had before when it was lawn. And the meadow seems to be supporting insects that have larger bodies compared to what's able to live in the lawn. I think just because anything bigger than an ant on the lawn gets picked off by the birds straight away. And the bigger insects and just more insects supports more birds and bat species. So just having higher biomass helps to support mammals further up the food chain. We've been doing some bat surveying this year for the first time. And it's been really surprising, but we set up these static bat detectors on the lawn side and the meadow side, and we have a lot more records of bats foraging on the meadow side than we do on the lawn side. It's just quite surprising to me that bat species that will forage over 15 kilometres and migrate from Lithuania, something as small as the King's Wildflower Meadow makes a difference to their behaviour, and you can see that kind of data show up. It's exciting.
That's amazing. That's really amazing. So we've got a question from Natasha, and she's wondering about maintenance of the meadow. How do you keep all the flowers in balance and stop one species from taking over?
Well, it's a good question. The general maintenance is that we mow the meadow for hay once a year. So we'll take a hay crop towards the end of the summer, sort of late July, beginning of August. And by taking the hay crop helps to take nutrients off the land, and the lower the nutrients in a grass sward, the more diverse it tends to be. With higher nutrients, competitive species like grasses or thistles tend to take over and dominate. And then sort of more broadly, I guess, we're not by coincidence, the soil is quite nutrient poor to begin with and quite dry, it's quite sandy. And that helps to keep a diverse sward in the first place.
Fantastic. So, I mean, I think it's been such an amazing addition to have to the backs and to the river to be able to see these wildflowers by Kings. Are there any other areas around Cambridge that you're desperate to see sort of turning into meadow?
I think we've been really sort of blown away and pleased by how well everyone seems to have responded to the meadow. It's really nice. Quite a few of the other colleges are have accepted bales of hay from Kings, and they're spreading them on their lawn swards to turn their lawn swards over to wildflower meadow, which is totally exciting. So Jesus College have done this on part of their lawn. So I think more college lawns to wildflower meadow would be an exciting thing.
Yeah, fantastic. So we've got a couple more questions from our audience. Amy asks, how do you get so many seeds?
A local seed supplier called Emma's Gate Seed. They're a great company. They put together seed mixes that are referable to local ecosystems, and they source and collect their seeds locally, which is quite important if you're thinking about conservation genetics and managing your populations.
Yeah. And Noah, age 7, asks, have you seen any red-tailed bumblebees? So we've got some zoologists in the audience, just wondering, have you seen any red-tailed bumblebees?
Not to my knowledge. Roz, have you?
I haven't whilst I've been there.
No, we had some buff-tailed bumblebees, didn't we?
Yeah.
And some solitary bees. We have quite a rare solitary bee called Lasioglossum smith manellum. It's fashionably scarce, probably declining, not quite small, sort of shiny green metallic. That probably is nesting in the old wall that divides Kings and Clare.
Yeah. So, I had another question. Will the whole lawn be converted eventually? Because that would look great, wouldn't it?
Yes, right to Kings. Yeah, I really hope so. Probably not the whole lawn. We'll maintain some lawn for marquees and entertaining, and to take some trampling. We want people to be able to come in and enjoy looking at the meadow from the inside. And lawn is very hard wearing, so a mixture of lawn and wildflowers, so you can walk on the lawn and enjoy the wildflowers, sort of thing. But yes, we're working at the moment on a final design for a mix of lawn and wildflower, which will include, I strongly hope, more wildflowers.
Oh, fantastic. And Karen asks, now you have taller grass, is there any chance of reptiles?
Any chance of reptiles?
Yeah.
Well, I was talking about this just the other day. We will put some carpet tiles down and start checking them and see. The question is, how would they get in? It's because there's a river on the west side, and then the land that's around it is probably not very reptile friendly. But maybe they're in there, maybe not. I don't know. We haven't checked yet.
I warned you, we've got some zoologists listening in. Do you know which species of bat has been visiting? That's Henry, age 7, has asked which species of bat have been visiting.
Yes, Henry, I do. So we also took a handheld bat recorder on a punt along the river, up and down Kings, along the backs. And we had 5 species of bat. We found Daubenton's, the water bat, on the river. We had brown long-eared bat, the 2 pipistrelles, common and soprano pip, and noctule, flying very high overhead along the river.
So quite species diverse.
Yeah, really, and a lot of bat activity. It's really, I can definitely recommend bat punting. It's being on the river is a great way to see lots of bats.
Sumi asks, how do you know what species of plant to add to the meadow?
We take inspiration from natural ecosystems that we see around us. So we've chosen to sow species that are typical of local East Anglian hay meadows. They're species that do well in our soil, and species that are part of our cultural history, I guess, as well as our local natural history.
And Jude and Sydney ask, have there been any unexpected plant species growing? So I think you've mentioned one already, haven't you? Yeah.
Yeah, so the Euphrasia confusa was an unexpected bonus, definitely. We also had Iberis amara, which is wild candy tuft, which is another nationally scarce and declining species. That's a species, it does really well, it's very specific, it does really well on south-facing, rabbit-grazed land, which is not quite what we have, but sort of sandy, disturbed soil, I guess. And then there is definitely a bit of blending between, there are some meadow species creeping into the flower beds and some flower bed species creeping into the meadow.
Yeah, it's going to happen, isn't it? Yeah. So Nishat, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly there, asks, what makes meadows special over a normal flower garden?
Yeah, well, so meadow refers to the management, and it means cutting it for hay. Otherwise it would be, or pasture, which is grazed, or lawn, which would be, I don't know, just mowed, like amenity land. So it's the management, and it's the hay crop. And then you might follow up with some light grazing over the winter, just to keep the sward height down and maybe remove some extra nutrients. But it's the management mainly.
Okay. And we've asked, does the meadow support any specific types of ant? This is getting quite
ant. Yes, we had 3 ants last year in our survey data. We had the, forgive me, I think this is right, more or less comes down to a red ant, a black ant and a yellow ant. The black ant was Lasius niger. Yellow meadow ant, I think, was one of them, and I can't remember anything more about the red ant, apart from red, that it was something, that it was sort of reddish. But quite common ant species.
And does the meadow support wasps?
I'm sure it does, I can't remember. Yes, and we did a pollinator survey and we had 13 species of pollinators, we only did it watched for a couple of hours. I can't remember what wasp species we had actually, but we did have some.
Fraser, aged 7, asks, are there any mammals visiting the meadow? So we've had bats, are there any other mammals?
We know about the bats. The Cambridgeshire Mammal Group have very kindly said that they'll come in and do a small mammal survey with us this year. And the best time to do that is autumn time when populations are highest. And what we'll do is set up a hedgehog tunnel. I don't know if you've seen them, they're really great. They're sort of like a triangular tent arrangement, and in the middle you put some food, and then you put 2 inky strips along each side, and the hedgehogs come in, walk across the ink, eat the food, and then walk out again and leave their footprints. So you're on A4 sheets of paper that you put down. So your data are these lovely little inky footprints on the paper. It's really lovely. And then they're called Longworth traps, so little aluminium traps with some bait that trap small mammals, and then obviously you release them in the morning. So we'll do that to see what's using the what's using the meadow.
Okay, well, thank you so much. We haven't quite had time to go through all of the questions. We'll try and answer some of the ones that we haven't been able to during this little interview. But thank you so much for joining us today, Cicely. It's such a wonderful project, and it's really fascinating to hear about it.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So you may be noticing these wildflowers around Cambridge, but what about the cows? Cambridge is a slightly unusual city in that we have herds of cattle on the common ground right in the city centre, and these cows have inspired a sculpture trail this summer called Cows About Cambridge. Now here at the museum, we are in on the act, but instead of a cow, we have a moose tree sculpture. So, inspired by Cows About Cambridge, we are setting you a challenge. For our Cowpats About Cambridge and beyond, we would like you to tell us what you can find in Cowpats. Now, here's Dr. Ed Turner to tell you how. Ed will be joining us live after this Cowpat dissection to answer your questions, so do pop them in the comments.
I'm Ed Turner, the Curator of Insects at the Museum of Zoology, and we're here on Cofen, investigating some of the insects that can be found in cowpats. Cowpats are really important, dung in general is really important for a whole range of insects, and that includes things like dung beetles. There's lots of different species of dung beetle in the UK that use this as a resource, mostly for their larvae. And there's also lots of flies and things that will feed in the cowpats, or on it as well. The most famous, if anything like this is famous, are the yellow dung flies, which are really distinctive, beautiful, bright yellow flies that you find on fresh cowpats. To investigate cowpats around Cambridge, all you need is some really simple kit. Do remember to wear gloves. Washing up gloves are absolutely fine. Wash your hands afterwards, of course, because there can be nasties living in that. But apart from that, what you need is, ask people first, a spoon from your kitchen, watch out well afterwards, or a trowel is really good, so something you can lift the cowpat up. And then something to put your collection of dung beetles and other insects that you'll find your cowpat in. There's an amazing diversity of life that lives in these things. Loads of things get drawn to cowpats. So I'm going to have a go at investigating our cowpat here. This is one that's probably a few days old, so it's not completely dry, it's not gone grey or anything like that, which is when they get really old. But it's got a crust on top, and it's going to be softer underneath, so it basically forms a seal. And what would have happened when this cowpat first arrived here is that lots of insects would have smelt it and come in and started to lay their eggs, to burrow into it, things like that. So I'm going to gently, the trick is to kind of use something like a spoon or a trowel to leverage up the end. And what we're then going to do is I'm going to use my forceps, but you can just use your hands if you're wearing gloves as well, it's often easier, and see what we can find actually in here. And if I gently slice under, it's like slicing a cake basically. Slicing under here, you can see the cowpats all in amongst the, all in amongst, exciting moment, all in amongst the grass. There's a dung beetle just straight away there, disappearing into the dung, one of the short-leggedy ones. I've got a bit of dung here. I'm going to show you these close up afterwards, but just to prove I'm not, I don't know if you can see this, but it's a little dung beetle straight away. It looks like it's playing dead, but it's not. It'll come back to life. That was right in amongst the dung, so that's straight away without doing anything. And I can already see lots of little holes and movement bits all in amongst the dung, which is where lots of these dung beetle and larvae have already started to burrow. Some dung beetles will even bring the dung down under the surface to be able to see tunnels and things like that. So we've been looking for about 3 or 4 minutes, and we've tried to get quite a nice collection of dung beetles for you. Found quite a lot of different things living in amongst the dung. I've not been able to collect the smaller stuff, you wouldn't be able to see it anyway, but there were lots of little tiny mites in there as well, so relatives of spiders moving around. And I also noticed some very fast moving rove beetles, which were probably in there to catch other insects that are using the dung. I didn't manage to catch those, they were too fast and too wily for me, but I have managed to get a lot of the dung beetles that were living actually in the dung itself, or right on the surface of the grass below the dung. But what we've found, I think, is, I'll just do a quick count, I should have done this before, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 dung beetles in there that we found really quite quickly, including I think about 4 species in there. And these have all got quite short legs. They belong to a group of dung beetles that don't actually make tunnels particularly. They rather live in amongst the dung, or actually below it, and that's where they lay their eggs, and that's where their larvae grow up. and they're really quite beautiful. So lovely little clubbed antennae, and often, as the species we've got here, different coloured wing cases to the rest of the beetle. So really appealing things. And you won't find these unless you burrow in, unless you have a look at some of this dung lying around. Now, cowpats and dung beetles themselves form a really important part of an ecosystem. They carry out functions which are really important for how these meadow systems actually work. In particular, dung beetles will do things like help to decompose this dung, remove it from the surface, and that means these cowpats don't last here forever. Unfortunately, if people treat cattle with things like chemicals which are there to protect the cattle from parasites, they can also affect dung beetles. And that means the dung beetle numbers go down, the biomass, the mass of dung beetles go down, and the diversity of dung beetles, the number of species, goes down as well. And what that means is that dung will sit about for longer, and we'll tend to get more of other species that use dung, particularly flies. That can be a real problem. So we should be working really hard to protect our dung beetles, not just because they're important and because they can remove the dung for us, but also because they're beautiful and diverse. So our challenge for you, for Cowpats About Cambridge, is to try and dissect your own cowpat. So remember, what we'll need is something like a trowel or a spoon to be able to tip over the cowpat. And what we want you to do is have a go at dissecting it as I've done, so move things apart, and count the number of dung beetles you can find in your cowpat. We'd really love you to send in your records and also any photographs you've got of those dung beetles to be able to count the number of dung beetles that you find. And if you send in some photos, of course, we're very happy to try and identify them for you as well.
And now we're joined live by Dr. Ed Turner. Hi, Ed.
Hello, thank you for inviting me.
So, we saw in your film that you found quite a few different species of dung beetle. How many sort of species of dung beetle are there?
So in the UK there's about 60 species more or less, although most of those will be, most individuals you find will be quite common things. So a few species will make up most of the individuals you find. If you think worldwide, there's maybe about 5,000 species of dung beetles worldwide. So it's quite diverse, quite a lot of different species doing a whole range of different processes.
Yeah, wow. Do we get different species with different types of dung? So would you get different beetles on horse dung compared to cow dung?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's some species which are quite generalist, so they can be found on a whole range of different dung. But yeah, you get certain specialisations on different types of dung, or even dung in different conditions as well. So some prefer warmer conditions in the sun, some prefer cooler conditions.
Okay. Wow. And do different types of dung beetle have sort of different ways of using the dung, different strategies?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the really interesting things about them. When you get more species, you get the dung dispersed more efficiently, and that's partly because they're doing it in different ways. So the two main groups we have here in the UK either live within the dung or just on the soil surface just below the dung. That's most of the things we found in the video. But others make tunnels below ground, and they've often got really big fat front legs which they can burrow down into the ground. Of course, worldwide there's also species that make these fantastic balls of dung which they can actually move the dung away, so they can disperse it away from the original site, and therefore avoid competition with other species and things like that.
Wow, it's amazing how you don't think of dung that much, but it's so important for so many beetles. So we've got some really great questions coming in from the audience. So Emma asks, I regularly encounter ants using cow dung pats to raise a colony with larvae and eggs, particularly in spring. Can't find any papers. Is there anything sort of written about ants using cow pats and cow dung?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I've never seen anything sort of formally published about it. It's very striking. I noticed that as well. I think it's probably just a temperature thing and maybe the right condition kind of thing. I found, I think, probably two common species you often find. You sometimes find the black ants, which are the commonest species in the UK, and that's just Niger. I think that they're often found under stones and pebbles. They're the kind of things you find under your patio. And so I suspect the cowpats being quite dark, once they've dried out, heat up. And so they're really good because very often warmer conditions means that larvae grow faster. And the other ones I sometimes find are yellow meadow ants, which are Lassis flavus, for things which are usually below ground. And there again, it might be a temperature thing, but I think also it's a really nice, you don't mind the cow dung, it's a really nice place to live. It's nice and moist and nice and warm.
Yeah. So, I mean, this sort of leads on to another question we've had, which is why are insects attracted to dung? Is it because of that kind of nice environment to live in?
I think it's partly that. I mean, it's also loads of resources. There's lots of food there. So dung beetles use it as a food source for their young. And of course, if you've got lots of other things feeding on it, well, then other things move in to feed on the things that are feeding on the dung, etc., etc. You've also got some wonderful species which move around with dung beetles as well. So lots of little mites which do things in the dung, like attack fly larvae and things like that, and move around on the dung beetles. So you end up with quite a complex community, a whole suite of things relying on this as a resource.
Yeah, that's amazing. So Jane asks, what flies wait on dung to catch and eat other flies? So are there flies that wait on dung to wait for other flies?
I don't know about that particularly. And the flies you normally see on the surface are yellow dung flies, and those are very often, you often get mating pairs of those, with the males and the females both together. And there's been loads of really interesting behavioural ecology carried out on that species, because they rely on the dung really to lay their eggs in and things like that, so it's a scarce resource. And these flies often distribute themselves in very complicated ways in relation to that, in an optimal way. In fact, they can kind of calculate how many flies there are on the dung and what the best chance is for them to leave and find an unoccupied cowpat, whether it's better to stay and put up the competition. So they're the commonest things that I tend to see on fresh cowpats anyway.
Yeah, well, that's amazing bit of calculation for a little fly to do.
Yeah, clever, all in the tiny little brain.
Is our cowpats the best fertiliser out there? I don't know. Can you answer that as a gardener?
Well, they're certainly very good. I think lots of things, of course. I mean, there's two sides to this as far as soil process, I suppose, concerned. There's one side which is the nutrient side of things. The other part of it, I think, is to do with having more organic matter in the soil, which can increase microbial activity and stuff like that. So it can often boost cycling, I suppose, of nutrients within the soil. The thing about cowpats is you get other processes below ground as a result of the cowpat being there that you might not get from digging in compost or something like that. And one of the main ones, again, I'm going to keep on talking about dung beetles, even though the question wasn't specifically about that. But dung beetles, of course, by doing that action of actually digging, whether it's a smaller species or a larger species, are turning over the soil. So bioturbation it's called, and that can be really important because it increases the aeration of the soil, which can be really useful for species that live within the soil itself. And what they're also doing is they're really integrating all of this organic matter into the rest of the soil profile, and that can often do things like increase nutrient availability to plants, but it can also increase water holding capacity. And of course, in today's kind of climate change world, things like having moister soils that can hold more water longer term, really, really useful. Useful for natural ecosystems, useful for agriculture as well.
Okay. So cowpats are generally all around a really good thing then?
They are, they are, as long as they've got all the beetles associated with it as well, the insects.
Yeah. So we've been asked, are all the species you find common, or have you found anything rare or unexpected in a cowpat?
I think you always find unexpected things when you start looking at wildlife. I mean, I'm not a particularly a dung beetle expert. I work on insects more generally, and I think there's always surprises. So no matter where you are, there's always surprises. So most of the time, the things you'll find in any habitat will be common. That's generally true wherever you are. There's a suite of species which are much more common than others, and then there's this long kind of tail of things which are just found in ones or twos in any particular habitat. And that's one of the things that makes studying biology, studying natural history, endlessly fascinating. You don't know what you're going to find. And cowpats, it's true of cowpats as well. I found once a very unusual species of ant that landed in my beer in a beer garden. It was fantastic. And so you can really find unusual things for insects anywhere.
Yeah, it's a good job it chose your beer. I don't know that everybody would have noticed.
Most people wouldn't have realised, but it was a very interesting species. It was a hothouse species, so not a native UK one, just landed. It was a flying ant.
Oh, fantastic. So, Julia, age 9, asks, what is the difference between different types of dung beetle?
So there's two answers to that, I think. It's a really good question. There's different species of dung beetles, of which, as I say, there's about 60 different species in the UK and about maybe 5,000 or more worldwide. We probably don't know how many species, in fact we definitely don't know how many species of dung beetle there are worldwide. There's lots that haven't yet been described. And those are groups of species which have got a unique evolutionary history, if you like. They're an unusual thing, rather like we're a species compared to chimpanzees or something like that. Each of these different types of dung beetles are also unique. The other answer to it is what these dung beetles do. And there's different functional groups of dung beetles, and by that I mean different ways they live. And that can be divided in lots of different ways. So it could be whereabouts they live. Do they like new cowpats or older cowpats? Or horsepats, or cowpats or other sorts of dung? Do they like wetter conditions or do they like drier conditions, high altitude or low altitude? So all of these different types, all together, if you bring them all together, what you end up with is a dung beetle for every occasion. And that means dung processing is really fast and really efficient, and that's very good for the rest of the ecosystem and for us.
Yeah, fantastic. Like that, dung beetle for every occasion.
It really is. Yeah.
New group of greetings cards there. So Sudina Thurka asks, what are the biggest threats to decomposers like dung beetles?
So there's lots of different threats to the natural world nowadays. I think everyone's probably aware of that. We live in unusual, interesting times, as they say. So there's lots of general threats to the natural world, which will impact dung beetles as well. The biggest ones worldwide are habitat change. So that's in the tropics. It's things like cutting down forests and converting them into agricultural areas, which really changes conditions for dung beetles. Work we've done with colleagues out in Southeast Asia and Malaysia and Indonesia have shown that you get huge changes in these sort of dung beetle communities as you change management practices, as things differ in the environment. Of course, the kind of elephant in the room, the large dung beetle in the room, is climate change, which is affecting everything. Of course, insects can be quite susceptible to small changes in temperature, to small changes in the environment. So if that alters, then it's going to benefit some species, and unfortunately it's going to disadvantage others. The thing that affects maybe specifically dung beetles as far as management is medicines used in cattle, particularly anti-worming drugs and things like that, which can really impact dung beetles that then feed on the dung, which of course still has those chemicals in them. And that can do things like kill the dung beetles directly, or it can have more subtle effects. So it can reduce the life expectancy of dung beetles, it can reduce the growth rate of larvae, things like that. It can change the composition of species found in dung.
Loads of questions. We might not be able to get through all of these, but we'll get through as many as we
I'll try
can.
and talk as quickly as I can.
So Bernie asks, now this sounds a bit dangerous. Can you use a pooter to catch the beetles?
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. I mean, you probably don't want to be inhaling loads of kind of like sort of dung, but of course a pooter's got a little guard on it. I wouldn't use them. There's one type of pooter you can use called Disney pooter, which is named after Henry Disney. Actually works in the department right here, and that's basically just a simple tube with a bit of netting in the middle. I wouldn't use that on a dung, but if you have a traditional style pooter, which is basically for those of you who don't know, it's a kind of a pot with one tube going in that goes into your mouth that's got netting on the bottom, and another tube that then you kind of goes into the cowpat or wherever you're collecting. And if you suck the one tube, then insects get drawn into the pot. Because of the netting, they don't go into your mouth. I think they're probably okay to use in dung, but don't inhale too deeply.
Yes. So Noah, age 7, wants to know what are the most common types of dung beetle in the UK?
So there's two kind of major groups of dung beetles in the UK, which is Onthophagus, they haven't really got common names, and Aphodius. And they're two groups which are quite easy to tell apart. There's lots and lots of different species within those. So the Onthophagus are ones which are basically long-leggedy ones. So they're quite round, they've got rather large legs and quite flat front legs, and they're the ones that make tunnels in the dung. The Aphodius are kind of longer, and they've sort of got shorter legs, and they tend to live actually within the cowpats. They're the ones you'll most easily find. If you turn over a cowpat, they'll be the ones you'll see kind of scuttling around all over the place. We've also got some fantastic larger species as well, so things like door beetles, which are another group of dung beetles again, which are the kind of famous ones in the UK. These quite large door beetles, which often feed on rabbit droppings, and they can be kind of comfortably that kind of size.
Wow.
So they're really big, and they've got a sort of a fluorescent kind of blue sheen to them. They're really beautiful.
That'd be quite something to see.
They're lovely.
So Sumi asks, would you usually find more dung beetles on dung from cows that have eaten more?
That's an interesting question, actually. So diet does have a big effect. So exactly what cows have been eating. So again, if you've got more diverse pastures, so not just grass but lots of herbs and things like that, you'll get different species of dung beetles living in it. You'll also get different species of dung beetles with different species of animals, of course, and that's partly to do with the diet. So carnivore dung is obviously much more smelly than cow dung, but can often attract a much wider suite of dung beetles. So again, work that I've been involved with in Southeast Asia, not really my own work actually, particularly work with someone called Eleanor Slade, who's a dung beetle expert that our group have worked with a lot. She uses human dung to attract in lots of different species of dung beetles. And the advantage of human dung is because we eat a whole variety of different things, it attracts a whole variety of different species. So it can be really useful. Of course, the problem is if people eat meat or don't. If they're sort of meat eaters or vegetarians, you eat different ones. You have to be very careful about blending the dung before you use it. But it's a fantastic collection technique, and you get really wonderful things, of course, in the tropics if you do that.
Yeah. So Henry asks, how many days should you leave the cowpat before dissection?
Well, you'll get different things the whole time. So I think you don't necessarily have to leave it. It depends what you're interested in. It's quite interesting to try and sort of have a variety, actually, or even follow a cowpat over time. You could do that too if you didn't disturb the whole thing too much. And what you'll find is that things really arrive very, very quickly, but over time you get new species moving in, and you also get different stages as well. You have a chance of finding the larval dung beetles, which are kind of grub-like things, later on. The other thing which is quite fun to do, again, don't only do this if you've got permission, but if you put down a fresh cowpat, or you find a fresh cowpat in somewhere that you're able to kind of dig, if you leave it for a few days and then dig under it, you can often find the tunnels of these burrowing dung beetles and have a look at what that's like inside. That's really interesting. Again, some work we've done in the tropics in Sumatra in Indonesia is to use plaster of Paris, that you can pour down some of these tunnels and actually visualise what the tunnels look like, and they're amazingly beautiful. Some of the really big dung beetles you get out there can have tunnels which are kind of a metre long or more, perhaps. So you can imagine kind of excavating that. You kind of pour the plaster of Paris down, and then you wait for it to dry, and then you really carefully excavate all around, and you end up with amazing long tubes, which, if you imagine the kind of cowpat sitting on the surface, all the tubes kind of spread out, so it looks almost like the roots of a tree. I think they're probably trying to avoid tunnelling into each other's tunnels. But of course what that means is you've got all of this amazing kind of soil movement going on below the ground. You wouldn't know it's happening normally.
Wow, that sounds amazing. So Saskia, age 7, and William, age 10, would like to know, what is the largest number of dung beetles that you've found in a cowpat?
I don't know, actually. I mean, I've probably got up to 50, I should think. Again, I don't do that often, but you can certainly get really high numbers. Not that many species, I mean, but individuals.
Because links to another question we've had from Zoe, aged 8. How many dung beetles can you get in 1 kilogram of dung?
I need to. That's a good question. I think someone needs to do the research to find that out and actually weigh it systematically. I've not done that. I'm not sure if other people have either. So it's something you could try and find out.
So maybe Zoe, that's something for you to have a go at.
Research, yeah.
Jose asks, do the beetle species vary with the seasons?
Yes, they do. So you get different things at different times of the year. And some dung beetles are found basically as adults throughout the year, active adults throughout the year. But most of them are most active in, this time of the year, really, May to September, something like that. So you'll notice that there's more species around in the summer in our parts of the world. There's a little bit of a changeover of when you get the adults being most active. So yeah, it changes. Worth looking at dung at all different times of the year.
Yeah. Fraser, age 7, asks, do different dung beetles or species fight over poo or territory?
Well, some do, yeah. So there's competition between them, certainly, and they'll kind of, you've sometimes sort of, beetles will sometimes kind of compete with each other as well. So yeah, that can certainly happen. And of course, some of the different strategies that dung beetles use to get at the dung, whether they're living in it, whether they're building tunnels in the tropics, whether they're rolling dung away and how far they're rolling it, that can often be to reduce that competition, to basically make sure that they get their bit of dung that they can use. So it's all ways of trying to basically make sure that they get the resources they need to raise their young.
So we've got 2 questions that are a little bit related here. So Alaya asks, grass-fed cows produce dung that attracts specific dung beetles. Does that mean that cow dung produced by cows that are fed on ground fish mixed with vegetables will attract the same dung beetles?
I think probably different. I don't know the specific answer to that, but very often the diet affects what comes to dung beetles. They're amazingly sensitive. So again, I'm still keep on talking about the tropics. That's where I've done most of my work related to dung beetles, rather than in areas around the UK. And there, if the dung arrives, dung beetles will start arriving almost immediately. They're amazingly sensitive, but a large part of that is to do with the sort of the smell of the dung, basically what's being given off by it, and that'll be affected by diet. And I think that'll probably affect what species you get turning up. So they're kind of, these things will be constantly trying to find fresh dung. And of course, if they can arrive early, it means, again, that's another way of avoiding that competition with other dung. If they can be dung beetles, if they can be really good at getting there, then they're more likely to be able to use it.
And related to it is from Zoe, aged 8. Did dung beetles go to different kinds of animal poo?
Yeah, definitely. So different species will have different suites of dung beetles in them. And as I mentioned, as it happens, human poo is very, very good at attracting a whole suite of different species. So in the tropics, if people are wanting to quantify the number of species, the abundances of species in different environments, as we've done in forest compared to forest that's been logged compared to agricultural areas, and very often people use human poo, and they don't just put it out, they'll kind of put it in a little kind of sack, and with a pot below it. And of course the dung beetles come in and then they fall into the pot, and that can be a really good way of monitoring the diversity of dung beetles in different systems. You need to have a peg on your nose to make sure it's not too horrible, but it's a really good way of measuring this amazing diversity.
So Nishat asks, do the species of insects vary according to the variety of different species of cows? So that's kind of related as well.
Oh yeah, different types of cows. I'm not sure actually. I mean, different types of cows are probably quite similar. So you certainly get much bigger differences between very different types of animals. So between a carnivore versus a herbivore or something, there'll be very, very different species of dung beetle living in those. Different types of cows, probably much less so, but maybe to an extent. I'm not aware of anyone that's kind of quantified that. You kind of predict it might do. It may be less important than what that particular cow is feeding on, though, I guess.
So this one's from Henry, and I think this is a really important thing, because we've been just talking about dung beetles as a general thing. He asks, why don't some common beetles have common names? How do we give them a common name?
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? I mean, common names basically come about because groups are popular on the whole, or because people try to popularise them as well. So, for example, lots of bugs, so not insects in general, but true bugs here, which are insects with piercing mouthparts, have been given names. But they're not old names like butterfly names. They're ones that were deliberately given when a popular book was written about bugs. So they can get common names in lots of different ways. But generally, it tends to be things which have been well known for a long time and have been studied popularly for a long time, which have got English names. So butterflies are a really good example. The issue, of course, is that when you've got these popular names, they can vary from place to place, from region to region, and that can make it sometimes difficult to identify exactly what species you're talking about. Not always, but sometimes. So again, there's a real advantage to using the proper names, at least when it comes to research. An example of that is. We've got a couple of species of little butterflies in the UK called skippers, the golden skipper. And we've got large skipper, small skipper, and Essex skipper, which all look quite similar. The large skipper is a bit bigger, and the large skipper and small skipper used to be called hogs instead. They used to be called the large hog and small hog, I think. So their name has changed over time, and that can happen when you've got common names.
Amy asks, is organic farming good for dung beetle diversity?
I think it can be, yeah. I mean, certainly if you're kind of careful about exactly there's different restrictions on what chemicals you can use in different places. But yeah, I think it potentially could be very good. Having more variety, more diversity, is probably even more important. And that could be something that happens on an organic farm, or it could be something that happens on a traditional farm as well. So, for example, if you have a more diverse meadow, that would still be really good for cows and really good for dung beetles. Different ways of getting to it.
So I think just two more questions. One, what is the smallest and the largest dung beetle in the UK? So big and small.
Oh goodness, I think probably one of the smallest ones is probably one of these little aphodious ones. I'm not sure about that. The largest will definitely be one of the door beetles, which are really big. And there's much larger ones that you get globally. And there's a really huge one we get in Southeast Asia called Curator. There's several different species within that group, and the beetles themselves are really massive. They're properly chunky beetles, and because they fly around as well, so they're really impressive in flight.
Last question, and sorry if we haven't got to your question, we'll try and answer them after the live stream. But what's the most common predator of dung beetles? That comes from Noah, age 7.
So loads and loads of things will eat dung beetles. That's one of the reasons I think why they're really useful in ecosystems. So they're important for what they do in terms of burying the dung and removing the dung from the soil surface. But they're also a fantastic resource for lots of birds, lots of bats, loads of larger vertebrates that feed on insects will feed on dung beetles as well. If you imagine, they're a really tasty resource for all these things.
So thank you so much for that, Ed. It's been really fascinating and a real journey into a world of animals that I haven't really appreciated enough before, I don't think. Thank you so much for that.
Pleasure, thank you.
So you can visit our blog, which is Museum of Zoology blog, all one word.com, and you can find a whole post on how to collect data, so that information for our Cowpats About Cambridge and Beyond challenge. So there's a form on there where you can upload photos of the dung beetles, the number of dung beetles that you find, and you don't have to be in Cambridge to do this, you can be anywhere. We would love to know more about the biodiversity that's being supported by Cowpats from all of you guys in the audience. If you add in your email address and name as well, we will enter you into a prize draw to win a mini wildlife explorer kit as well. So please do help us to explore that biodiversity that's being supported by Cowpats. Now, if you want some ideas on places where you might be able to look for Cowpats in Cambridge, we've got you covered here at the museum, because for Zoology Live this year, we've put together a brand new trail around the city, showing you some of the really good places to spot urban wildlife.
Explore the green spaces and unexpected wildlife havens around Cambridge City this summer. Observe pollinating bees and butterflies, hunt for beetles under logs, or listen to the birds sing. Our Cambridge Safari Trail has 14 wildlife spots across the city to choose from. Look out for the brown spots, as these are excellent places to get involved in our Cowpats About Cambridge Summer Challenge. See our blog site for more information. You can find the trail on our blog too, and either access it on a smartphone or download and print a PDF version. Happy exploring!
So to finish today's live stream, we're going to stay on the topic of poop. And did you know that many of the museums in Cambridge have dung-related objects and research? Our final film shares just a few of these, but before I play it, I want to say a really big thank you to both Cicely and Ed for joining us today, and to you for watching. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 7 o'clock, when we will dive under the ocean to explore the animals of the sea.